morning, everybody. Ohio gozaimasu. It's the extent of my Japanese. My name is Ken Hodge, and I have the privilege and the honour of chairing the sessions invited symposium on psychology applied to football games. Can you hear me in the back okay, Mark, without a microphone? Yeah, thank you. So, we have three presentations, myself, Kali Araki from the University of Hyogo, Japan, and Geir and Dave from the Norwegian School of Sports Sciences in Norway. So each of us are going to speak for about 30 minutes and then leave some time after each presentation for 5, 6, 7 minutes of questions. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them at the end of each session. If we are disciplined and stick to our time frames, we'll be finished pretty close to 11 o'clock. So we'll have time for coffee and talk after that. So the first presentation is mine. I've titled mine The Psychology of Success in Football. And I've got 4 studies which focus on the sport of rugby union and talk about issues that relate, mostly indirectly, but still do relate to success and how important that is in sport. So I work at the School of Physical Education at the University of Otago in New Zealand, which is, those of you who follow rugby will know, is the host country for this year's Rugby World Cup. And I'm hoping to get to see the Japan versus Canada rugby game. And Japan will triumph. As long as the All Blacks triumph, I'll be happy. So we have a rugby research group at the University of Otago with a range of researchers who are investigating every branch of sport and exercise science you can imagine applied to the sport of rugby. If you're not aware, rugby is the national sport in New Zealand. It is hugely popular and has a major focus. So what I'm going to talk about in 30 minutes, I've got 4 studies. Each of these studies, to some extent, uses either achievement goal theory or self-determination theory, which is a theory of intrinsic motivation in sport. And those of you who are psychologists will be familiar with the theory part, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the start just making sure those of you who have not seen it before understand the basics of these 2 theories, and then you hopefully can understand the findings that we found, and then of course the implications. So we'll talk about what we believe are very practical implications out of this research. I've got 4 studies. First one is on intrinsic motivation in professional rugby. Second one is an achievement motivation study which looks at non-elite rugby players and look at different goal profiles or cluster groups of people with different types of motivation. The third one is one that I found very interesting because it was about an issue that we spend very little time researching, and yet it's really important, which is training. Most of our research is about playing or competition or performance. There are very few studies that actually look at training, and yet most athletes train far more than they play. And yet we know very little about the motivation required to do that training. And the last one is an important area too. Thankfully it's not a major problem, but burnout is a serious problem for those athletes who do suffer from it, and it's an issue in rugby, especially since the game's gone professional. So I'm going to take you through these 4 studies, not all in equal detail. I'll leave out a lot of information, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask. So these first 4 or 5 slides, for those of you who know the motivation and sports psychology literature, you're going to find that they're just a recap of stuff you already know. Just to reinforce why this matters. Sport is voluntary. We choose to do it. We don't have to do it. So any act of choosing to do something voluntarily, by definition, is an act of motivation. You are motivated to try and achieve something by choosing to do this activity when you do not have to do that activity. You have a choice. So simply put, motivation is, in simple terms, defined as anything that impels a person to action, anything that gets us to act, to behave, to do something. So psychologists, we're interested in what type of motivation motivates people to act. And if we can understand that as coaches or as mental skills trainers or sports psychologists, then we can help players improve or maintain their level of motivation. Because motivation, as I'm sure many of you are aware, can be a difficult thing to maintain, particularly when success is not coming. So again, motivation is something that impels a person to action. 2 theories, I'll look at each of these in a bit more detail. The first one is achievement motivation theory. For those of you who know, this was developed in educational psychology, and I'm proud to say that John Nichols, the author, he's dead now, in New Zealand. He did most of his research in the United States. And his theory The key focus within achievement motivation, from his perspective, is that people are motivated to perceive that they have ability, to ascribe to themselves, I'm competent, I'm able, I have capacity to do the tasks that are required of me. And if we feel that way, we perceive we have that ability that fuels our self-esteem, our satisfaction, our happiness, and in turn our performance. Now, self-determination theory, which is what these little letters here, I'll explain more of that in a moment, focuses on explaining both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And the gist of this theory is that human beings are motivated to satisfy three needs, and I'll go through these three needs in a little more detail in a moment: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. You already see there's an overlap here of competence and competence between these two theories. So I'll go through each of them in a bit more detail. So I've just highlighted in red. There's an overlap here. Both these theories have as a part of their element human beings motivated to feel competent. And of course, competitive sport, we're trying to improve our skills, become more competent. And if you're a professional athlete, you're paid or reimbursed, or remunerated, I should say, for your level of competence. So motivation for competence can have a huge impact on performance. So a little more detail on achievement goal theory. As I said, the goal of action here is the person wants to perceive themselves as being competent. How do they assess, what criteria do they use to arrive at their decision of whether I am competent or not? Achievement goal theory says as individuals, we have these goal orientations, a personality characteristic, not as stable and as enduring as a personality trait, but nevertheless predictable. If you know someone's goal orientation, you can reasonably reliably predict how they will be motivated in a particular situation. It's important to know here that, whoops, I'll go back, I hope, yes. It's not an either or. This theory of motivation, unlike some, does not characterise these two, task and ego, as bipolar at other ends of the curriculum. It characterises them as orthogonal. You can be high in both, low in both, high in one, low in the other. And you'll see in one of our research studies later that's exactly what we found. So people use, most of us will have both of these orientations as part of our motivational profile. So the first one labelled here is a task orientation, where the focus or the criteria of how you assess whether you have ability or not is self-referenced. Am I better than I was last time at this particular activity or task? Have I been able to master this task? So the focus is on improving yourself. And the reference point is you, not someone else, but you. Am I better, measured on a skill level or competence level, than I was last time? Whereas ego orientation, and the name comes from the fact that your ego is involved because it involves pride, it's other reference. Am I better than another person? Am I a better golfer than Kaola? I doubt it. So the point of reference, sport, of course, is inherently competitive. Social comparison is part of sport, designed with scores and rankings and times to see if we're better than other people. So it shouldn't surprise us that an ego orientation is very prominent in sport. There are some problems with ego orientation in terms of performance we'll talk about later. The point is, most of us are motivated by both. It's not an either or, it's a question of how much of each do you have, and you'll see in some of our research studies in a moment, we've found some evidence to give a very clear practical recommendation of which is better. I'll study that a little bit. So in layperson's terms, I think, hopefully you can read that right at the back, a task orientation isn't so much focused on winning, like ego, it's more focused on how to win, the process of how to win. If I do these skills correctly and do them well, and my teammates, if it's a team sport, do them well, then we increase our chances of winning. So the focus from a layperson perspective here is more on how to win than winning. And that's a subtle but really important difference from a practical viewpoint. So that's achievement goal theory. Self-determination theory, which looks at intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, designed by these folks here. It's an incredible theory if you're interested in motivation. I'm a big fan of it. It has been used all over the world, including here in Japan and other Asian countries, to look at a range of life domains, not just sport. This was designed in social psychology. Very powerful theory in my experience. So DC and Ryan, their theory, they say that human beings have three basic psychological needs. Three basic, they believe they're that important, basic needs. That if our participation in an activity satisfies these three basic needs, I'll talk about these in a moment, the more these are satisfied, the more intrinsically motivated we will be. The more these three needs are not satisfied or thwarted, the more we will be extrinsically motivated. And I'll talk more later that in terms of performance, intrinsic motivation is far more powerful than extrinsic. So the more we can help players develop or maintain intrinsic motivation, the better they're going to perform, the less burnout, things like that we're going to be used to. So I'll define each of these three basic needs: autonomy, which is where the name self-determination comes from, competence, and relatedness. I'll define each of those now. So autonomy, it's easy to misinterpret autonomy. Some people think of autonomy, and in their onboard dictionary, they see autonomy as self-focused or even selfish. That is not what autonomy means from this perspective. Autonomy is not about being selfish or totally self-focused, but it's about the perception that I'm in charge. Not that I'm ignoring other people, but I make choices. So I'm the perceived origin or source of my behaviour. I have volition, action choice within activities, decisional choice. I perceive that the cause of this behaviour is within me. So even if I choose to do something I don't enjoy or don't like because the coach or the team wants me to do it, if I perceive that I have the choice to do that activity, it's still autonomously motivated even though it's for the team. And you can think how important the perception of feeling that you've chosen to do this, you have control, you have volition, that's a powerful, powerful impact on self-esteem and happiness. And also, we'll find out later in terms of preventing burnout, but also enhancing performance. So competence, similar to goal orientation theory, feeling effective in your interactions with the social environment. Basically, do I feel capable and competent? The skills that are demanded of me and the activity that I've chosen to participate in, and the studies you're going to see here are rugby union. If I feel competent and skillful, that will satisfy me. If I play in a team or I'm coached or I'm playing at a level that allows me to feel I'm showing my competence and my skills, my need will be satisfied and I will be intrinsically motivated. The third one is relatedness. The title is a bit deceptive, but feeling connected to others, caring for other human beings, and feeling like other human beings care for you. A sense of belonging. I belong here. Right? And a team sport like rugby, very important. Team spirit, teamwork is based on people respecting each other. We don't have to be the best of friends, but we have to like and respect each other if we're going to succeed. So each of these three needs are important. They're not equally important, and one of the questions in one of our studies was to look at how important are each of the needs when it comes to performance. So self-determination theory says we're trying to satisfy these three basic needs. The more they are satisfied, the more intrinsically motivated we'll be, and then we'll have consequences like flow and performance. The more these three needs are not satisfied, we'll have more extrinsic motivation, and then we're going to have problems and consequences like burnout. Now, way back here is where a lot of us are. Who or what influences the person's perception that their basic needs are being satisfied? A big part of that driver is the coach and teammates and other people. So we can have a significant impact or influence, both positive and sometimes negative, on whether the athlete perceives that they're satisfying their basic needs. So we can intervene. And if we have time, or if you're interested, I have some practical advice we've developed on how coaches can incorporate the ideas in this theory into their coaching practice. So it's to take that a step further. So if we're coaching climate, basic psych needs, if they're satisfied, we have intrinsic motivation, and then we have these various consequences. So that's the basic sort of model, if you like, that a number of the studies I'm going to show you have focused on.